I stood in my driveway at 6 in the morning, watching two police officers walk toward my front door. My hands were shaking as I held the manila folder containing 3 years of evidence. Evidence that would destroy the woman who had made my life a living hell for the past 8 months. Karen Whitmore stood on her porch across the street, arms crossed, wearing that same smug expression she had worn the day she first demanded my Wi-Fi password. She thought she had won. She thought her campaign to drive me out of Willowbrook Estates had succeeded. But as I watched the officers ring her doorbell, I could not help but smile, because Karen had no idea what was about to hit her. She had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. She had harassed a cybersecurity engineer who specialized in digital forensics. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was stealing from every single person in our neighborhood. My name is Marcus Thompson, and 8 months ago, I thought I had finally made it. At 35 years old, I had just purchased my dream home in Willowbrook Estates, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. The house was a beautiful two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a perfectly manicured lawn that stretched out like green carpet. I remember standing on that porch for the first time, keys still warm in my hand, feeling a sense of accomplishment that words could barely capture. After years of working 60-hour weeks as a cybersecurity engineer, living in cramped apartments and saving every penny, I had finally earned my place in suburbia. This was my American dream realized. The neighborhood was everything I had imagined it would be. White picket fences lined every property. Rose bushes bloomed in neat rows. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks that looked like they had been pressure washed that morning. Every house seemed to compete for the title of most perfect lawn and most pristine exterior. It was on my second day that I met Karen Whitmore. I was setting up my home office, carrying computer equipment from my car to the house, when she appeared at my front door. She was a woman in her late 50s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, extending her hand. "I am Karen Whitmore. I live right next door." She seemed friendly enough at first, but within minutes of our conversation, I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. Karen was asking too many questions. She wanted to know what I did for work, what hours I kept, whether I planned to have visitors regularly. When I told her I was a cybersecurity engineer who worked from home, her eyes lit up with interest. "Oh, how fascinating," she said. "You must know all about computers and internet security. That is so important these days, do you not think? Maintaining proper standards and making sure everything stays secure." The way she said "standards" sent a chill down my spine. There was something loaded in that word, something that suggested she was not just talking about internet security. "I also serve on the HOA board," Karen continued. "We take great pride in maintaining neighborhood standards here in Willowbrook Estates. I am sure you understand the importance of fitting in and being a good neighbor." I assured her that I intended to be the best neighbor possible, but as she walked away, I caught her glancing back at my house with an expression that was hard to read. It was not quite disapproval, but it was not approval either. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my routine. I worked from my home office, which I had set up with multiple monitors, server equipment, and all the tools I needed for my cybersecurity consulting business. I specialized in digital forensics and network security, helping companies protect themselves from hackers and data breaches. But I began to notice that Karen was always watching. When I looked out my window, she was often standing at hers, peering across the yard at my house. When I went to get my mail, she would suddenly appear on her porch, making small talk while her eyes darted toward my front door. The questions never stopped either. She wanted to know when I received deliveries, what kind of work I was doing, whether I had clients coming to the house. She framed everything as neighborly concern, but her tone suggested something deeper, something that made me increasingly uncomfortable. "You keep such interesting hours," she said one morning as I was bringing in packages. "I hope all that computer equipment does not cause any problems for the neighborhood." I forced a smile and assured her that my work was completely legitimate and posed no issues for anyone. But as I closed my front door, I could not shake the feeling that Corinne Whitmore was going to be a problem. I had no idea just how big a problem she would become. 3 months into living in Willowbrook Estates, I performed my routine monthly security maintenance. As a cybersecurity professional, I changed all my passwords regularly, updated my firewall settings, and ran comprehensive security scans on all my devices. It was second nature to me, like brushing my teeth or checking my locks before bed. On this particular Tuesday morning, I changed my Wi-Fi password from SecureNet2024 to CyberSafe2025. It took exactly 30 seconds. I updated the password on all my devices and went back to work, thinking nothing more about it. 20 minutes later, someone was pounding on my front door. I looked out the window and saw Corinne Whitmore standing on my porch, her face red with anger. She was wearing a bright yellow tracksuit and holding her smartphone in her hand like a weapon. The pleasant mask she usually wore was completely gone. I opened the door cautiously. "Corinne, is everything okay?" "No, everything is not okay," she snapped. "My internet stopped working, and I know you did something to cause it." I blinked in confusion. "I am sorry, but I do not understand. How would I have caused your internet to stop working?" "Do not play dumb with me," Corinne said, stepping closer to my doorway. "You changed your Wi-Fi password, did you not?" The pieces suddenly clicked into place, and I felt my stomach drop. "Corinne, are you telling me you have been using my Wi-Fi?" "Of course I have been using your Wi-Fi," she said, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "It is called being neighborly. Decent neighbors share their internet connection. It is part of living in a community." I stood there speechless for a moment, trying to process what I was hearing. This woman had been stealing my internet for months and was now angry that I had secured my own network. "Corinne," I said slowly, "accessing someone else's Wi-Fi without permission is actually illegal. It is considered unauthorized access to a computer network." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do not lecture me about what is legal and illegal. I know exactly what my rights are as a member of this community. What you are doing is hostile and uncooperative." "What I am doing is protecting my own network security," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. "I change my passwords regularly as part of my security protocols. This has nothing to do with being neighborly or unneighborly." "That is exactly what this is about," Corinne shot back. "Ever since you moved into this neighborhood, you have been standoffish and antisocial. You work all hours, you have strange equipment delivered to your house, and now you are cutting off internet access that I have been relying on for months." I could not believe what I was hearing. "Corinne, it is my internet connection. I pay for it. You have been using it without asking, which means you have been stealing from me." "Stealing?" Corinne's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "How dare you accuse me of stealing? I am a respected member of this community. I am on the HOA board. I have lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I know what constitutes good neighborly behavior." "Good neighborly behavior does not include accessing someone else's internet without permission," I said firmly. Karen took another step closer, and I could see the rage building in her eyes. You listen to me very carefully, Marcus. I do not know what kind of neighborhood you came from, but here in Willowbrook Estates, we have standards. We have expectations. And when someone moves in and immediately starts causing problems, we take action. I have not caused any problems, I said. I have been nothing but respectful to everyone in this neighborhood. Respectful, Karen laughed bitterly. You call cutting off internet access respectful. You call refusing to share community resources respectful. Let me tell you what is going to happen. I am going to report this incident to the HOA board. I am going to file a complaint about your antisocial behavior and your failure to cooperate with neighborhood community standards. You are going to file a complaint because I secured my own Wi-Fi network, I asked, incredulous. I am going to file a complaint because you are being deliberately hostile and disruptive to neighborhood harmony, Karen said. And if you think this is over, you are very much mistaken. I have ways of dealing with neighbors who do not want to be part of our community. With that threat hanging in the air, Karen turned and stormed back toward her house. I watched her go, my mind reeling from the conversation. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. In my professional life, I had dealt with corporate espionage, data breaches, and sophisticated cyber attacks, but I had never encountered anything quite like Corinne Whitmore. She had been stealing my internet for months, and somehow I was the bad guy for stopping her. As I walked back to my office, I had a sinking feeling that this Wi-Fi incident was just the beginning. Karen had made it clear that she considered herself the arbiter of neighborhood standards, and she had just declared war on me. I had no idea how right I was. Karen Whitmore was not the type of person who made empty threats. Within a week of our Wi-Fi confrontation, the first official letter arrived in my mailbox. It was printed on official Willowbrook Estates HOA letterhead and signed by 3 board members, including Karen herself. Dear Mr. Thompson, it began, we have received multiple complaints regarding your failure to maintain community standards and your uncooperative attitude toward fellow residents. Please be advised that the following violations have been noted. My hands shook as I read the list. My grass was allegedly too long, exceeding the HOA limit by half an inch. My mailbox was positioned 3 inches too far from the curb. I had failed to submit proper documentation for my home office equipment. Each violation came with a potential fine ranging from $50 to $200. I walked around my property with a tape measure, checking every single claim. My grass was exactly within the specified height range. My mailbox was positioned correctly according to the HOA guidelines I had been given when I moved in. The home office equipment documentation requirement did not exist anywhere in the official HOA rules. These were not real violations. They were fabricated harassment disguised as official governance. The next week brought another letter. This time, the violations were even more absurd. My trash cans were allegedly visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, though I had security camera footage proving I had brought them in within 4 hours. My outdoor lighting was supposedly too bright and disturbing to neighbors, despite using the exact same fixtures as every other house on the street. But the letters were just the beginning. Karen had launched a whisper campaign that was far more insidious than any official documentation. I began to notice the change immediately. Neighbors who had previously waved and made small talk suddenly avoided eye contact. The friendly woman across the street stopped returning my greetings. The couple next door seemed to hurry inside whenever they saw me coming. I learned what Karen was telling them when I overheard a conversation at the mailbox cluster. Two neighbors were speaking in low voices, unaware that I was approaching from behind. Karen says he has all kinds of strange equipment in his house, one was saying. She thinks he might be running some kind of illegal business. All those computers and servers working at all hours. It does not seem normal. And did you hear about how hostile he was when she asked about the internet? The other replied. She was just trying to be neighborly and he completely shut her down. Very suspicious behavior. I cleared my throat, and both women turned around with guilty expressions. They mumbled awkward greetings and quickly walked away, leaving me standing alone at the mailbox with a growing sense of isolation. The HOA meetings became a special kind of torture. Every month, I would sit in the community center conference room, surrounded by neighbors who had been poisoned against me by Karen's lies. She would chair the meetings with the authority of someone who had appointed herself neighborhood judge and jury. We need to discuss the ongoing issues with resident compliance, Karen would say, her eyes fixed on me. Some homeowners seem to believe that community standards are optional suggestions rather than binding agreements. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone in the room knew exactly who she was talking about. The other board members would nod along, either genuinely convinced by her narrative or too intimidated to challenge her authority. The questions came every month. Why was I working such unusual hours? What exactly was the nature of my business? Why did I need so much computer equipment? Could I provide documentation proving that my home office was compliant with zoning regulations? I answered every question professionally and completely. I provided documentation that I was not required to provide. I proved that every single violation notice was unfounded. But it did not matter. Karen had already convinced them that I was the problem. The stress was beginning to affect my work. I found myself checking my mailbox multiple times a day, dreading the next fabricated violation. I started documenting everything with photographs and timestamps, building a defensive case file that grew thicker each week. 3 months into Karen's campaign, she escalated to the nuclear option. During a packed HOA meeting, she stood up and made her most serious accusation yet. "I hate to bring this up publicly," she said, though her tone suggested she relished the opportunity. "But I am genuinely concerned that one of our residents may be conducting illegal activities from their home. The amount of computer equipment, the strange hours, the secretive behavior, the hostility toward community cooperation. I think we need to consider involving outside authorities." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. I felt my face burning with anger and humiliation, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I would be happy to provide documentation of my legitimate cybersecurity consulting business to anyone who requests it," I said evenly. "I have nothing to hide." But the damage was done. Karen had planted seeds of suspicion that would be impossible to uproot through rational explanation. She had weaponized the HOA against me, turning community governance into a tool of personal harassment. As I drove home that night, I realized that Karen Whitmore was not just a difficult neighbor. She was a master manipulator who had turned my dream home into a waking nightmare. And she was not going to stop until she had driven me out of Willowbrook Estates entirely. The turning point came on a Friday night when I received my fourth violation notice in as many weeks. This time, Karen was claiming that my security cameras violated neighborhood privacy rules. The irony was not lost on me that the same woman who had been stealing my internet was now complaining about privacy violations. As I sat in my home office, staring at the latest fabricated complaint, something inside me snapped. I was tired of being defensive. I was tired of playing by rules that only applied to me. Corinne Whitmore wanted to play games, fine, but she had picked the wrong opponent. I was a cybersecurity engineer with 15 years of experience in digital forensics. I specialized in uncovering hidden information, tracking digital footprints, and building airtight cases from electronic evidence. Corinne had no idea that her harassment campaign had just awakened a very particular set of skills. I started with basic open-source intelligence gathering. Within an hour, I had compiled Corinne's complete digital profile, her social media accounts, property records, employment history, and public involvement in community organizations. What I found was immediately revealing. Corinne Whitmore had a pattern. Over the past 5 years, she had been involved in complaints and disputes with at least 12 different neighbors. The complaints followed a consistent pattern: allegations of rule violations, accusations of antisocial behavior, and campaigns to pressure residents into selling their homes and moving away. Her Facebook posts were particularly illuminating. Corinne shared content that revealed her true attitudes about neighborhood composition and community standards, posts about property values and demographic changes, complaints about renters and young families, coded language that spoke volumes about her real motivations. But the most damning evidence came from neighborhood forums and local Facebook community groups. I found posts where Corinne bragged about her success in maintaining neighborhood character. She wrote about residents who had been encouraged to move elsewhere and how the community was better off without them. Some people just do not understand what it takes to maintain a quality neighborhood, she had written 6 months before I moved in. Sometimes you have to take firm action to protect property values and community standards. I cross-referenced the dates of her forum posts with property sales in the neighborhood. The pattern was undeniable. Every family that Corinne had targeted eventually sold their home and moved away. A young Hispanic couple who had allegedly violated landscaping rules. An elderly black man whose visitors were supposedly causing parking problems. A single mother whose children were too noisy according to community complaints. All of them had faced the same escalating campaign of violations, whisper campaigns, and HOA harassment that I was experiencing. All of them had eventually given up and left the neighborhood. But Corinne had made a critical error in targeting me. Unlike her previous victims, I had the technical skills and professional resources to fight back, and more importantly, I was not going anywhere. I dug deeper into Corinne's background, using legal database searches and public records requests. What I found was a woman who had made a career out of wielding institutional power against people she deemed undesirable. She had filed complaints with city code enforcement, called police for noise violations, and used her HOA position to systematically harass residents. The most disturbing discovery came when I accessed the HOA's internal communication records through a Freedom of Information request. As a board member, Corinne had access to detailed personal information about every resident in Willowbrook Estates. Property values, mortgage information, employment records, family composition, and contact details. She had been using this information to build dossiers on residents she wanted to target. She knew exactly how much financial pressure each family could withstand. She knew who was struggling with mortgage payments and might be vulnerable to a campaign designed to force them out. Corinne Whitmore was not just a difficult neighbor or an overzealous HOA board member. She was running a systematic campaign of racial and economic discrimination, using her position of authority to ethnically cleanse the neighborhood one family at a time. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was also deeply personal. I realized that every violation notice, every hostile HOA meeting, every whispered conversation between neighbors was part of a calculated strategy to make my life unbearable. Karen had studied me, analyzed my weaknesses, and deployed precisely the tactics she thought would break me. But she had fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. I was not going to be another family driven out by her harassment. I was going to be her downfall. As I compiled my research into organized files, I felt something I had not experienced in months: hope. For the first time since moving to Willowbrook Estates, I was not playing defense. I was gathering ammunition for a counterattack that Corinne would never see coming. She thought she was fighting an isolated homeowner with no resources and no allies. She had no idea she was fighting a cybersecurity expert with access to forensic tools and investigative techniques that would expose every dirty secret she had been hiding. The hunter was about to become the hunted. My investigation into Corinne Whitmore took an unexpected turn when I decided to examine the HOA's financial records. As a cybersecurity consultant, I had learned that financial irregularities often revealed deeper patterns of misconduct. If Corinne was abusing her authority in harassment campaigns, there might be other areas where she was overstepping her bounds. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was required by law to make certain financial documents available to homeowners upon request. I submitted a formal request for the past 3 years of budgets, expenditures, and contractor payments. Corinne, as the HOA treasurer, was legally obligated to provide these records within 30 days. What I received was a stack of documents that immediately raised red flags. The financial statements looked professionally prepared, but my trained eye caught discrepancies that would have been invisible to most homeowners. Line items that did not add up correctly. Contractor payments that seemed inflated for the work performed. Expenditures for community improvements that had never been completed. I spent an entire weekend analyzing the financial records, using forensic accounting techniques I had learned during my cybersecurity training. What emerged was a pattern of systematic embezzlement that had been going on for over 3 years. Corinne had been stealing from the HOA in multiple ways. She inflated contractor costs and pocketed the difference. She created fake expenses for community improvements that never happened. She approved payments to shell companies that existed only on paper. The amounts were carefully calculated to avoid triggering audits while maximizing her personal profit. Over 3 years, Corinne Whitmore had embezzled over $60,000 from the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Every homeowner in the neighborhood had been paying inflated fees to fund Corinne's personal shopping sprees and home improvements. But the most damning evidence came when I cross-referenced Corinne's luxury purchases with major HOA expenditures. The timeline was impossible to ignore. The month the HOA paid $15,000 for landscaping improvements that never materialized, Corinne posted Facebook photos of her brand new BMW. When the community fund was charged $8,000 for parking lot repairs that were never completed, Corinne's Instagram showed off her kitchen renovation. She had been funding her lifestyle by stealing from her neighbors, all while positioning herself as the guardian of community standards and fiscal responsibility. As I stared at the evidence spread across my desk, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Corinne's harassment campaign against me was not just about racial prejudice or neighborhood control. It was about self-preservation. Corinne Whitmore had realized that I was a cybersecurity professional with the exact skills needed to uncover financial fraud. My background in digital forensics and network security made me the most dangerous person who could have moved into Willowbrook Estates. She had not been trying to drive me out because of my race or my profession. She had been trying to drive me out before I discovered her crimes. The Wi-Fi incident had been her first attempt to establish a hostile relationship that would make me want to leave voluntarily. When that failed, she escalated to the harassment campaign, hoping to make my life so miserable that I would sell my house and move away before conducting any serious investigation into HOA operations. Every violation notice, every hostile meeting, every whispered rumor had been part of a desperate attempt to eliminate the one person in the neighborhood capable of exposing her embezzlement scheme. Karen had been running scared from the moment I moved in. Her aggressive behavior was not confidence, it was panic disguised as authority. I spent the next week building an airtight case. I documented every fraudulent transaction, traced the flow of stolen money, and compiled evidence that would be impossible to dispute in court. I had bank records, contractor invoices, fake company registrations, and a timeline that connected Karen's personal purchases to HOA theft. But I also faced a moral dilemma that kept me awake at night. Exposing Karen's crimes would destroy her life completely. She would face criminal charges, financial ruin, and public humiliation. Her 15-year reputation in the community would be shattered overnight. Part of me wanted to simply confront her privately and demand that she stop her harassment campaign in exchange for my silence. It would be the easy solution that avoided a messy legal battle and community upheaval. But then I thought about all the families Karen had driven out of Willowbrook Estates through her systematic harassment. I thought about the $60,000 she had stolen from hardworking homeowners who trusted her with their community funds. I thought about her plan to continue targeting minorities and families who did not fit her vision of neighborhood composition. Karen Whitmore was not just a difficult neighbor or an overzealous board member. She was a criminal who had been using her position of authority to steal money and drive out residents based on racial and economic discrimination. She had made her choice when she decided to weaponize the HOA against me. Now it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was airtight. Karen Whitmore's reign of terror in Willowbrook Estates was about to come to an explosive end. I decided to give Karen Whitmore one chance to make things right before I destroyed her life completely. It was more courtesy than she deserved, but I wanted to look myself in the mirror knowing that I had taken the high road even when dealing with someone who had shown me no mercy. On a Tuesday morning, I walked across the street and knocked on Karen's front door. She answered wearing a silk robe and an expression of barely contained annoyance. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, not bothering to hide her hostility. "I think we need to have a conversation," I said calmly. "It is about the HOA finances and some irregularities I have discovered." For just a moment, I saw something flicker in Karen's eyes. Fear. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough to hide her initial reaction. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, "and I do not appreciate you coming to my door making vague accusations." "They are not vague accusations," I replied. "I have spent the past 2 weeks conducting a forensic analysis of the HOA financial records. I have documentation of over $60,000 in embezzled funds over the past 3 years. Karen's face went pale, but she maintained her defiant posture. "That is ridiculous. The HOA finances are completely transparent and properly managed. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next board meeting." I pulled out a manila folder and opened it to reveal the first page of evidence. Bank statements, contractor invoices, and a timeline connecting her personal purchases to fraudulent HOA expenditures. "Karen," I have proof, I said quietly. I have traced every fraudulent transaction. I know about the fake contractor companies, the inflated expenses, and the community improvements that were paid for but never completed. I know about your BMW purchase that coincided with the $15,000 landscaping payment that never resulted in any landscaping work. Karen stared at the documents, and I watched as the reality of her situation sank in. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the folder. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You cannot have. How did you?" "I am a cybersecurity expert with 15 years of experience in digital forensics," I said. "Financial fraud investigation is literally part of my job description. Did you really think you could embezzle $60,000 without leaving a digital trail?" Karen's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into a chair by her front door. The mask of authority and confidence had completely crumbled, revealing a desperate woman who had just realized her world was about to collapse. "What do you want?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to make full restitution to the HOA," I said. "I want you to resign from the board immediately. I want you to stop your harassment campaign against me and issue a public apology for the false accusations you have made. And I want a guarantee that you will never target another resident for discriminatory harassment." Karen looked up at me with wild eyes. "If I do all that, you will keep quiet about the financial issues." "I am offering you a chance to make this right before it becomes a criminal matter," I said. "But this is a one-time offer, and it expires in 24 hours. For a moment, I thought Karen might actually accept the deal. She seemed to be weighing her options, calculating whether she could make restitution without destroying her life completely. But then something changed in her expression. The desperation was replaced by anger, and the anger grew into rage. "You think you can blackmail me," she said, standing up and pointing her finger at my chest. "You think you can come into this neighborhood and threaten me. I have lived here for 15 years. I know everyone. I have connections. I can make your life a living hell in ways you cannot even imagine." "Karen, you are not understanding the situation," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am not blackmailing you. I am offering you a chance to resolve this quietly before I take the evidence to the police and the district attorney." "You would not dare," she snarled. "If you try to destroy me, I will take you down with me. I will tell everyone that you hacked into private financial records. I will claim that you fabricated evidence to frame me. I will make sure that every person in this neighborhood knows that you are a criminal who targeted an innocent woman." I closed the folder and took a step back. "So that is your final answer. You are choosing to fight this rather than make restitution." "I am choosing to destroy you before you can destroy me," Karen said, her voice rising to a near shout. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. I have resources. I have allies. I have been protecting this neighborhood from people like you for years, and I am not going to stop now." "People like me?" I asked quietly. "You know exactly what I mean," Karen said, her mask completely off now. "People who do not belong here. People who do not understand our values and our standards. People who come in and try to disrupt everything we have built." I nodded slowly, finally hearing Karen speak her truth without pretense or coded language. "Thank you for clarifying your position. You have made this decision much easier for me." As I walked away from Karen's house, I could hear her shouting threats from her doorway. She was going to ruin my reputation. She was going to have me arrested for harassment. She was going to make sure I never worked in cybersecurity again. But her threats no longer carried any weight. Karen Whitmore had just rejected her final opportunity for mercy. She had chosen to go to war against someone who held overwhelming evidence of her crimes. It was the last mistake she would ever make as a free woman. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to the district attorney's office, where I submitted a formal complaint of embezzlement with 60 pages of supporting evidence. The second was to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, since Karen's scheme involved mail fraud and wire transfers across state lines. The third was to the Willowbrook Estates HOA board president, informing him that their treasurer was about to be arrested for stealing community funds. The response was swift and decisive. Within 24 hours, law enforcement had frozen Karen's bank accounts and seized her financial records. The FBI executed a search warrant on her home, removing boxes of documents and computer equipment while her neighbors watched in shock. Karen was arrested on Thursday morning as she tried to leave for work. I watched from my window as 2 federal agents placed handcuffs on the woman who had made my life a nightmare for 8 months. The irony was perfect. She was being arrested for financial crimes discovered by the same cybersecurity expert she had tried so desperately to drive away. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Once the news broke about Karen's embezzlement, neighbors began coming forward with their own stories of harassment and discrimination. The elderly black man who had been forced to sell his house revealed that Karen had filed over 30 false complaints against him. The Hispanic family who had moved away shared recordings of Karen's racist comments during HOA meetings. By Friday, it was clear that Karen's crimes extended far beyond financial fraud. The FBI investigation expanded to include civil rights violations, mail fraud, and conspiracy charges. Her systematic campaign of racial harassment was now the subject of a federal hate crime investigation. The Willowbrook Estates community held an emergency meeting to address the crisis. I was asked to serve as interim treasurer while the HOA recovered the stolen funds and implemented new oversight procedures. The neighbors who had shunned me for months now approached with sheepish apologies and expressions of gratitude. "We had no idea what she was really doing," one neighbor said. "We thought she was just trying to maintain property values." Karen ultimately pleaded guilty to embezzlement, mail fraud, and civil rights